Hey guys, so today we're going to be making this dreamy landscape scene in Blender. This is heavily inspired by the works of James Traley. If you're not familiar with him, you can go check out his channel and his portfolio. All of his work is really well done. Quick disclaimer for this tutorial, I'm going to be using the Botaniq Add On by Botaniq. I'm going to be linking G-Scatter by Grasswald. It's a free add-on that lets you scatter objects across planes down below. So you can go ahead and use that as well. It functions the exact same as the scatter assets in Botaniq. So with that being said, let's get into the tutorial. So what we're going to do first is we're going to open up Blender. We're going to just highlight everything and delete it. We're going to hit Shift A and we're going to add in a plane. And we're going to go to our object properties. We're going to scale the X up by 15 and the Y up by 28. We're going to zoom out and we're going to hit Tab. We're going to go into edit mode. We're going to right click, hit subdivide. Open up the subdivide panel, subdivide it 100 times, right click, hit subdivide and add it one more time. This is just so we have a lot of geometry on our plane. This is going to be our ground plane. So we can go ahead and rename this ground. And then we can exit out of edit mode. And then what I like to do to set up my scenes first is I like to add in a human model just for scale purposes. This allows me just to be able to have a reference with the scale for all of our assets and models that we're going to be using. So we can just go ahead and we can just drag this into the center of our screen. We can highlight all this, hit 0, and we can rotate this on the X and scale this down a little bit because this guy's just a little big. So now that we have that set up, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go up to the upper left of our screen and we're going to drag it and we're going to split it. What I'm going to do here is the left side is going to be my camera view and the right side is going to be where we're modeling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add in a camera. I'm going to zero out everything. And what we're going to do for the camera, we're going to bring it back to -5. We're going to bring it up 1 on the Z. We're going to make the X rotation 95. So now if we click on the left side of our screen and hit 0 on our numpad, this will give us our camera view. One other thing that we're going to do with this camera is we're going to go into our camera properties. We're going to go to viewport display and we're going to turn the passer port all the way up. Just so this is just only going to show us what is going to be in our render area. Then also what we're going to do is we're going to go to our output properties. We're going to change the X to 1080 and the Y to 1350 because this was the size that I used for my original render. And we're just going to click on the human model again and scale it down just a smidge more. So now to get into the rest of the modeling for the scene, what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A and we're going to add in a cube. And then we're going to hit the tilde key, go to the front view, and then we're going to click on our move tool, and then we're going to hold down Command or Control, and we're going to just drag this up until it's on the bottom right at 0 on our plane in our 3D viewport. Then we're going to right click on it, and we're going to hit Set Origin to 3D Cursor. And the reason that we do this is so now when we scale up this cube, it's going to be based off of the bottom of the cube instead of the center, so it stays flat on our plane, on our ground plane. What we're going to do next is we're going to hit Tab. We're going to go to Face Select. We're going to hit the front face, hit X, hit Delete Face, and do that as well with the bottom. So we have the front of this and the floor cut out. And then we're going to tab out of edit mode, and we're just going to scale this up just a little bit. Then we're going to go on our Z, scale our Z up a smidge more just so it's out of view from the camera, and scale our X up as well. So just this back wall is viewable. So now that we have our room set up, what we're going to do is we need to cut out a doorway from this room, which we can go ahead and rename room. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A. We're going to go to Mesh. We're going to add in a UV sphere. We're going to go to our modifier panel, and we're going to add a subdivision surface. Do 2 just to give it a little bit more geometry. Go ahead and hit Apply. And then we're going to right click and shade smooth. And what we're going to do with this sphere is we're going to line it up to where we would like our doorway to be. So we're going to scale it up a little bit, bring it up, hit the tilde key, go to top view, line this up centered with where we want our doorway on our cube. And now what we can do is we can scale this up just a little bit more. We want this circle to be almost to the edge of our camera area. We're going to go up to top, just make sure this is lined up still perfect. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a Boolean modifier to our room. What this is going to do is it's going to allow us to cut out this sphere from our back wall. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our modifier panel. We're going to add in a Boolean modifier. Make sure it's set to difference. What we're going to do is we're going to select this sphere. And now what we do, because we added this, if we go ahead and we hide this sphere, you can see it cut out that sphere from the room. So what we can go ahead and do is we can hide the sphere and then just turn it off from our render view. And the last thing that we're going to do with this room is this needs a little bit of thickness because right now it just looks like a flat plane. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a solidify modifier, and we're going to bring this thickness up to 0.1. And now what this does is this just gives a little thickness to this room. So now the doorway looks a little bit more realistic. And so what we can go ahead and do now is we can go ahead and we can apply the Boolean and we can apply the solidify modifier. We can go ahead and we can click on the sphere, hit X, and just go ahead and delete it because we're not going to need it anymore. And now what we're going to do next is we're going to do a little bit more work on our ground plane because right now it just looks like a flat plane. And we want it to be a little bit more interesting. So what we're going to go ahead and do actually first is we're going to click on our ground plane and we're going to move it up just to the edge of the camera view. Bring it back just a little bit. There we go. So now we have this long, wide open field. This is essentially going to be our field that we're going to end up scattering our floral assets in. So what we can do to add a little bit of geometry to this, to make this a little bit more interesting, we're going to click on object mode and we're going to go to sculpt mode. And what this is going to let us do is this is going to let us draw in some sort of hills and some ground variation in our scene. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click on our inflate brush. This is the one I like to use. Make the strength go up, make the radius go up, and now we can just go ahead and just draw in some hills all along this plane. Draw this in, maybe make the radius go down a little more, get some more variation in. You can see how this is looking on the left side here. It's just giving a little bit of ground displacement. So we just don't have a flat plane to work with here. And this is why we added in all that geometry earlier. Then else what we're going to do is we're going to hit 0 on our number pad and then go down into here and just add a little variation around the edges of this wall here. Then we're going to hit the middle mouse wheel, scroll back up, and as you can see, this distorted this a little bit. So the other tool that you can use in the sculpt tool just to clean up this kind of broken geometry is you can click on this smooth option. You can go in and just smooth all this broken pieces back out. Maybe make the radius a little bigger just so it smooths it out pretty nicely, just to get rid of all this broken stuff. Perfect. So now we have a little bit displacement, and now this doesn't just look like a flat plane, it looks more like ground. So we're going to go out of sculpt mode. We're going to go back into object mode. And now the last piece of geometry that we're going to add in is we're going to add in some landscape in the background to give it some more depth. So I'm going to be using the ANT landscape add-on. This actually comes with Blender. So if you go up to edit and you go to preferences and you click on add-ons, you can type in a.n.t landscape and you can go ahead and enable it. And what this lets you do is when you hit Shift A, you can go to mesh and you can click on landscape. This is going to add in a nice little landscape piece for you. There's a lot of different presets that you can use that I like to start with. There's mountains, there's lakes, there's rocks. It's a really detailed add-on, and it's great that it just comes natively with Blender. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn up this subdivision to 256 just to give it a little bit more detail, and we're actually just going to keep everything else the same. We can go ahead and click out of this. And what we're going to do now is we're going to just rotate this to get this lined up where we want to. So we're going to hit RX -90, maybe RX -90 again. That's looking pretty good. And so what we're going to do next is we need to make this bigger because obviously right now this doesn't look like a mountain. So we're going to hit S31, make this pretty big, scroll out, just drag it to the back of our plane and get this lined up where we want it to be. So it's at the edge of our plane here. That's looking pretty good. Drag it over to the right just a little bit. So we get a little bit of some sky right here that we're going to be adding in. Perfect. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add in our flowers to this scene. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be using the Botaniq Add On, as I said earlier. So I'm going to click on this plane. I'm going to hit N. Then I'm going to go over to Polygonic. I'm going to open up the Botaniq Add On. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to scatter in our assets on to this plane. And we can actually go ahead and hit Shade Smooth because we haven't hit that yet. And go ahead and hit that on the mountain as well. And the room. The Shade Smooth, we're going to go over to the Object Data Properties panel. We're going to open up the normals and we're just going to hit Auto Smooth. This will kind of fix all those issues with the Shade Smooth. So back to the scattering. What we're going to do is we're going to click on our plane, go down to the scatter portion of Botaniq. We're going to hit a plus, and then we're going to go to the flower option. Click on here, and I think I used rustic bed, flower bed rustic. Yeah, so we're going to use that and we're going to hit OK. What this is going to do is this is going to shove all of these models randomly over this surface. And this looks pretty good already, but there's some things that we can do to tweak this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go down to the scale. We're going to bring the scale down a little bit because it's looking too big for our person. We want these to be fairly overgrown, but we still want them to be a fairly realistic size. That's looking pretty good. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go down to this density section. And we're going to hit on this paintbrush. What this is going to let us do is this is going to let us weight paint where we want these flowers to appear on our ground plane. Because right now we have a lot of flowers all over the plane. And we don't really need them everywhere. We just need them within our camera view. So a quick little tip that I like to do to kind of get the outline is just to paint around your camera edges here on this. And what this is going to kind of let you do is it's going to let you see where on this plane, about rough estimate, all these flowers are. So what we're going to do is just make sure our room's all painted in and just paint all the way back on this plane. Make sure everything's covered in the camera view here on the left-hand side. So once we get that all done, that's looking pretty good. We can hit go back. And now we have this density feature that we can apply to other assets that we scatter. So what we're going to do is we're just going to click on this other section here. This is for the grass. We're just going to click on density and add this as well. So now as you can see, all of these flowers are just in where we painted. And that's what we want because we don't need to be rendering out everything on the left and the right here. Then we're going to go up. Just one other edit that we're going to do is we're just going to change the density to both of these to 20,000 because that's what looks pretty decent for this surface. So 20,000 and then 20,000. There we go. And we could probably bring the scale down just a little bit more to make it look a little bit more realistic. Maybe 0.6. That's looking pretty good. All right, so now that we have all of our models in, what we need to start doing is we need to start shading and lighting our whole scene. So what we're going to do first is because we don't really need this human model anymore, we're going to go ahead and hide it and disable it in our render just so we don't accidentally view that and have that come out in our final render because that's not part of our scene. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go to our world properties. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add an environment texture. So environment textures are great just to get some base lightings for the scene. I'm going to use The Sky is on Fire from Polyhaven. You can go ahead and download that for free. This is the one that I just felt looked the best for this scene. But we're going to go over to cycles because that's what we want to use for this. We're going to change to experimental GPU compute. I'm going to add in some viewport denoising, and I have an RTX card, so I'm going to just go ahead and hit optics and change this to about 200. All right, so now what we can do is we can go ahead and click on the left side of our scene. We can hit Z. We can go up to rendered, view our rendered scene now. So now this has our HDRI in it, and this is looking pretty good already, but we're going to tweak this just a little bit to make this look a little bit more realistic. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag up this part on the bottom, and we're going to change this to our shader editor. And we're going to click on object and change that to world. What we can go ahead and do if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enable is we can hit Command T and press on this, and it's going to add a texture coordinate and a mapping coordinate. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it on the Z-axis until we get our sun to be peeking right over the mountains, wherever this is at. I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this. Just rotate this a little bit more. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Go ahead and click on this left side of the screen and hit 0 on our numpad again so we can get a view of where it's going to be at on our camera. We're going to use 195. We're going to do 195 on the Z rotation, and now we have some base lighting for our scene. This is looking pretty good so far, but we want some more contrast. We need some light rays because right now this just looks pretty dark. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A. We're going to add in a light. We're going to add in a sun. What we're going to do is we're just going to drag this up, drag this to about where we want this. This actually doesn't matter where it's at. It's just a little bit easier for visualization. So the sun is coming from this upper left over the mountain part of the scene. So if you click on this little yellow dot, what this will let you do is this will let you rotate this sun, and we're just going to point this right into the room. And to see what's happening, we're going to go over to the object data properties, and we're going to change the strength for the sun up to, I think, about a 50, just to get some nice contrast. This is a lot right now, but this will just let you kind of see where your sun's going to go. We're just going to keep rotating this until it's coming into the room. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on our color, and we're just going to make this a little bit warmer because we want a nice warm scene for this. And that's looking pretty good so far. All right, so now we have our base lighting set up for this scene done. And what else we're going to do is we need a little bit more foreground elements here, because as of right now, we just have this blank wall up top and it's not looking very interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Botaniq. I'm going to hit spawn asset and I'm going to type in cherry blossom. There's all these great cherry blossom assets that they have in this. You can use any tree models that you want. I just like using these ones, so I'm going to hit OK. That's going to spawn that into the scene. These are all to scale, but for this specific scene, they're a little bit too big. So we're going to hit S and we're going to scale this down a little bit just to be the correct size that we want. We're going to bring this over to the right side of our room and just line it up where we want it to be based off of our render. We can scale this up a little more because right now it's a little small and it's clipping through this. Just got to line this up to where it looks realistic to make sure it's not clipping through the scene. Maybe bring it to the right a little more. There we go. So that one's looking pretty good. What we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift E, we're going to duplicate it, and we're just going to drag it over to the left side as well. Maybe scale this one down a little bit. Actually, we're going to scale this up. We're going to bring this one forward towards the camera a little more. So now we have some more depth to our scene that kind of fills out that empty spot on the top. And we're going to click on this and just bring this one back over to the right just a smidge more. There we go. So now we have a little bit more interesting foreground. This just helps provide some more depth to the scene and kind of get more scale. So now that we have all of our models and our base lighting set up, what we're going to want to do is we're going to add some materials to our surfaces just to make it a smidge more interesting. So I have some free PBR textures just from Polyhaven as well that I'm going to be using for this that I already have set up in my asset browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to materials, I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to do plaster, I'm going to do plaster white 2 for this one. So you can just go ahead and drag that in. That one's looking pretty good. For our ground plane, we're going to go to terrain and we're going to add in aerial grass rocks. And then for our mountain, we're going to use this aerial rocks from Polyhaven. We're going to drag that on. And as you can see, what happens when you drag this on is it looks fairly distorted and it doesn't look correct. 100% how we want it to look at. And that's because the displacement in the shader is too high. So we're going to go ahead and open up our shader editor now. We're going to change this from world to object. We're going to go down to displacement. And this scale for our displacement set up to 5. And we're going to change this to about a 0.2. See how that looks? Maybe 0.1. Do 0.1. There we go. So now we have our mountains, but as you can see, this texture is not mapped accordingly on to this surface. So what we need to do is we need to unwrap this texture. And you always have to do this with the ANT landscape stuff that I have found. So we're going to go ahead and click on this on the right-hand side of our screen. We're going to hit Tab. We're going to hit A to make sure everything's selected. We're going to hit U for UV, and we're going to hit Unwrap. So there we go. So now since we unwrap this, if you tab out, you can see that this texture is being applied appropriately to this surface. So if we go ahead and hit 0, you can go back, you can see that this texture is on it. However, if you look at this, the grass looks too big, the rocks look too big, it doesn't look like it's scaled appropriately. So if we go back into edit mode and select everything with A, then if you click up here where it says edit mode, or excuse me, if you go to the left and click on UV editor, this is what this unwrapped looks like. So everything that is behind the highlighted orange stuff is our image texture. And this is all the faces and vertices for our object. So what we're going to do is we're just going to line this up in the center and we're going to hit S and we're just going to scale this up a little bit till it looks a little bit more realistic. That's looking pretty good. Tab out of edit mode. We can go back to our 3D viewport and that's looking a lot better. This doesn't have to be 100% accurate because we're going to add some volumetrics to this scene that's going to blur out the background a little bit. But this is just to help a little bit to try to make this look as real as possible. So what we're going to do next, this is the last thing that we're going to add, is we're going to hit Shift A and we're going to add in a cube because we need some volumetric lighting for this scene. We're going to hit tilde, go to front view, and drag this up to the bottom as well again, just so we can scale this up appropriately like I explained before. So we're going to go ahead. Oh, forgot to set the origin. I'm going to right click, hit set origin to 3D cursor. And now when we scale this up, it stays flat. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to enclose our whole scene in this cube. Go and make our X a little wider, make our Y a little longer. Drag this over so our whole scene is in this cube. There we go. And now we can't see anything in our scene in our 3D viewport. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to this viewport display section in our object properties, and we're going to display this from as textured to as bounds. And this will just let us be able to see our whole scene. But as you can see in the render view, everything's really dark. Why is that? Because we need to add in our volumetrics to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit new material on this. I'm going to go ahead and rename this fog. This cube, and then we're going to hit X and delete the principled BDSF. What we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A, and we're going to search up for a principled volume. Go ahead, click that, add that in, and we're going to plug the volume into the volume. And what this is going to do is this is going to add volume to our entire cube. So as you can see, there it is. But the density, which is this slider, is much too high for this scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to 0.01. Go back to this, hit 0. And as you can see, this added in some fog into our scene. We're just going to change the color to something a little warm, and we're going to bring it up just a little bit right now. So that's basically it for all the modeling portion of this scene. The rest of it's all compositing. So we're going to go ahead and get this set up for a test render, so then we can go into our compositor and start compositing it. So we're going to just go to our color management and our render properties panel, make sure it's set to medium contrast. And then we're also going to go into our view layer properties, and we're going to enable just the basic mist pass. Then we're going to go back to our render properties panel. We're going to set our render just to 32 just for a quick test export, do denoise, and I'm going to change this to optics. And that should be all set up for that. So we're going to go up to render, and we're going to hit render image. So now that our test render is done, we can go ahead and go to our compositor. We can check use nodes. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to add in a viewer node. So we're going to hit Shift A, search up a viewer node and plug that in. So now we can see what our test render looks like. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and connect the mist to the image so we can edit this mist layer how we want it to look like. So the first thing that we need to do is this is pretty noisy, so we need to denoise it. So we're going to hit Shift A and search up a denoise node. I'm going to just put that in right there. This is going to go ahead and this is going to get rid of all of that noise. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to change this to a color that we want this to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A, we're going to search, and we're going to add in a mix node. We're going to plug this in. We're going to put the denoise into the factor of this in the original image into the top image on this. And what this is going to do is this is going to start mixing in this mist into our original scene. We're going to change this mix node to add because we want to add it into our scene. So it'll have our original image plus the denoise. And we're going to plus the denoise mist layer. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to change this color to a warm color. So now this is added in. I'm just going to drag that over a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. And the next thing that we're going to do, because we want this mist to be a little blurry, we're going to hit Shift A and we're going to add in a blur node. We're just going to keep it set to the defaults and just change the X and the Y blur to 2 and 2. And this is going to go ahead and this is going to blur out our whole image just a little bit. But what we can do with that is we can add in another mix node. So Shift A, add in a mix node, plug this in. We can plug this blur into the bottom image and the original image into the top. And what this is going to let us do is this factor is going to let us decide how much we want to mix this in. So if it's at 0, it's our original test export render. And if it's at 1, it's 100% mixed in. For this scene, I think it looks good at around 0.4. So we're going to go ahead and add that in. And the next thing that we're going to do is we want to add in a little bit of a fake bloom effect that you would get with Eevee, but you can do that with the glare node in the compositor. So we're going to hit Shift A. We're going to search up a glare. We're going to add in the glare. You can see this is what the glare is going to look like, but we don't want streaks. We want to change this to fog glow. And the default settings for this looks good for me for this render. So we're just going to go ahead and keep that as that. And then the last thing that we want to do is this scene's looking pretty dull. So we're going to hit Shift A and we're going to add in a color balance. And this is going to just add in a little bit more contrast to the scene. So we're going to change this from lift, gamma, and gain. We're going to change it to offset, power, and slope. And we're going to make this power a light blue and just bring it up a little bit. And we're going to make this slope a little bit of a warm color and bring it up a bit. As you can see, this adds in just a little bit of contrast back into this scene. I think I want a little bit more contrast for this, so we can also hit Shift A. We can add a brightness and contrast node, and we're just going to bring this up, the contrast, by like 0.3. Maybe 1. Do 1 going for that. That's looking pretty good so far. The reason that we use the color balance as opposed to just the contrast is this lets you pick colors to increase the contrast with, and light blue for the power and yellow for the slope just is what I found works the best for this. So once all this compositing is set up, we can go ahead and we can drag the composite back over and connect this last node into the image. And what this will do is this is going to apply all of this post-processing to our render once it's done rendering. So when we're out of that, we can go back to our layout. I'm going to just hit Z and get out of the rendered here for this. And we can go ahead and set this up to export. So what I used for this is I used 1080 by 1350. And I used 1000 for my max samples. You can just go up and you can go up to render image, and that'll be your final scene. So I hope that you learned something today and that you enjoyed the tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.